Okay, colleagues, I think we have many more guests who have joined us. I'm still not sure if the first two presenters, oh, I see Akande is here, but we don't have Samuel. Let's just see. Colleagues, to those of you who have just joined us, we agreed to give a few minutes to more participants to join this session, and in particular our presenters. I'm just going to send a message now to check if our first presenter is here. All right, colleagues, I think we're going to start in the interest of time. Welcome, welcome. Thank you for joining us. We have an exciting session for you. I'll start by introducing myself, and I'll then hand over briefly to my co-chair to introduce himself. My name is Yanga Zembezondi. I'm a professor in the discipline for community development in the School of Built Environment and Development Studies. I'm also the academic leader for community engagement in the school. And it is my great honor and pleasure to be chairing today's session on co-production of urban space. I'm going to hand over just quickly to my co-chair to introduce himself. Over to you, Lwa. Lwandile. Hello. Okay, I think my co-chair may be having internet connection challenges. We'll let him introduce himself in time. Colleagues, welcome. I want to first just go over some housekeeping rules, or at least to outline for you how we would like this session to run. So we have 4 presenters, and they are going to have 20 minutes each to present. So the way I want this to run is to allow each person to present, and after they've presented, allow for 5 minutes of discussion. We welcome people contributing to the discussions or questions by raising their hands. But if you find that you are not able to, if I don't give you, or my co-chair doesn't give you, if other hands have already been raised, if you don't get an opportunity to address the room verbally, please send us your questions via the chat facility. And we'll be sure to communicate them to the relevant presenter. We will then, so we'll give each person an opportunity, each presenter an opportunity to take us through their presentation, after which we will have 5 minutes of discussion. And at the end, we will then have final remarks from myself and my co-chair. Lwandile, have you been able to sort out your audio issues?
Yes, Prof. Pardon me for that. Morning, everybody. A very warm welcome to everyone, and you, Prof, for the opportunity to allow me to be your co-chair. Okay, as I've been introduced, my name is Zulandile Manyoni, and I'll be working, yes, with alongside Prof Yanka for this room. I am a second-year master's student in town and regional planning here at the University of KwaZulu-Natal under the School of Built Environment. And yeah, just to take this opportunity to thank everyone for being a part of this, and also thank Prof. Makitimisha and Samuel Mudisa as well for welcoming me and allowing me to be part of this beautiful conference. Overall, I just want to also take this opportunity to say that I look forward to the presentations and discussions we're going to have today, and I hope we have a productive moment. Thank you again.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lwandile. Just to say, before I give a brief overview of the theme of this session, I want to note to our presenters that when you have 5 minutes remaining of your presentation time, we will send you a chat message. So please pay attention to that chat facility. If you see a message coming in, know that your time is up, basically. So colleagues, as we said, we are in this room and in this session to have an exciting time of listening to presentations and engaging in discussions about co-production of urban spaces. The topic of co-production of urban spaces is a very important and relevant one, not just in South Africa, but globally, at a time where the city environment is highly contested and proven to be exclusionary and inaccessible to vast majorities of populations all over the world. And so the inequity of access to the urban space, which also then manifests in unequal experiences of belonging and citizenship in the city, compels us to find multi-stakeholder processes and to develop partnerships between different stakeholders, between different institutions, between residents and government institutions, between governments and the private sector, between governments and the non-profit sector. Multiple stakeholders are needed to come around the table and co-produce solutions to make our urban spaces inclusive, to make the right to the city, and to make citizenship and belonging in the city a right and an opportunity that is available to all. We've heard in the plenary session how we have several major populations that even when they are able to physically access the city, but their lived experiences of occupying, of their bodies occupying those spaces are not only not pleasant, but in fact tell of a sad story of exclusion, of marginalization, and of people who are not able to experience the city as a space that is welcoming and that allows them to flourish and thrive in all kinds of ways. So today we're going to have 4 presentations that are going to be given by prominent scholars and academics in the urban and inclusive city space. And they're going to give us presentations that are going to give us a sense of the kinds of solutions that cities in different parts of the world that they're testing out, the kinds of reflections and conversations that are being held to figure out how we make the urban space habitable for all. Our first speaker, let's just check to make sure that he is now in the room. Our first speaker is a PhD candidate, Mr. Samuel Madeyese, who's been, as we've heard, a very instrumental person in helping Prof. Hope Makadimisha Chipungu and her team bring this conference to a reality. So he's going to be presenting on behalf of his group, which comprises himself and Prof. Ahangelani Makadimisha Chipungu and Prof. Lovemore Chipungu, and is going to present the findings of a study that they've done to look at the relevance of the indicator variables of a paradigm called the Hungarian City Development Paradigm in Lokoja, North Central Nigeria. Sam, you have 20 minutes to present. When you are left with 5 minutes for your presentation, we're going to send you a message via the chat box. Please keep note of it, and then ask you to end after those 20 minutes, after which we'll then open the floor for questions and answers. Over to you, Sam.
Thank you very much, Prof. Thank you for this opportunity to make my presentation. My name is Madeyese Samuel. I'm a PhD candidate under the supervision of Professor Makadimisha Chipungu. And I will be making a presentation titled The Predictive Relevance of the Indicator Variables of Hungarian City Development Paradigm in Lokoja, North Central Nigeria. Now, my presentation will follow this format. I'll have a brief introduction. I'll look at a few literature, the indicator variables, the conceptual nexus, the methodology. We'll look at the structural model, the path coefficient, the predictive relevance, and the findings of this research. Now, as a startup, the search for the ideal city, especially in Africa, has led all over the world, has led to several models, several ideologies, which include the issue of environmental awareness, urban governance, and management, sustainability, urban livability, and inclusion, physical inclusion. However, one agitating question is the fact that does sustainability guarantees livability? If a city is sustainable and livable, does it include everyone? These are the important questions that has led to the evolving the Hungarian city model. These important questions are the pivot upon which the paradigm is actually hinged. The Hungarian city is projected to be a city where everyone has equal access to the city's natural and artificial resources, ensuring that no space is violated and there is a regulated consumption of pattern for urban resources, both in natural terms and the man-made resources. The Hungarian city would be driven by three important indicators: the consumption patterns, the access to urban environment, and the social fairness. These are critical factors which would determine what the Hungarian city would be like. And it is also important to note that the Hungarian city model is actually an anglicized alias from the word Hangulani, a vendor word. And here we're looking at it in terms of having a city without ills. So, and we're looking at cities in Africa which can benefit from the paradigm, but from this paradigm shift. The major essence of this model is the fact that over the years, African cities have been projected from the spectrum, from the lens of indicators which are foreign, which are alien to the African city system. However, the Hungarian city model is actually looking at tested literature indicators, but domesticated within the African setting to ensure that we are speaking a language that actually relates with the African people. Now, in ensuring or establishing this model, we look at the nexus, the linkages between environmental awareness, the urban governance, the sustainability, urban livability, and inclusive physical development. We measured environmental awareness from the standpoint of environmental knowledge, motivation, and value. We measured urban governance and management from the standpoint of population management, planning, family planning, credit facilities, and hospital network system. These were the indicators that were used and tested to measure urban governance and management. In evaluating our sustainability, we try to domesticate the economic prosperity, social and environmental domain of the sustainability, but look at it in more clear terms as it affects African cities. Therefore, urban livability, we looked at it from the spectrum of livable communities, quality of life, and placemaking. While for inclusivity, we looked at safety, resilience, and justice. All this put together are linked in a web of interrelationship to give us what we see as the Hungarian city development. And this particular city development is looked at from the point, as I've earlier said, from access to the city, consumption pattern, and equity. All this will form the ground for the Hungarian city development, as we all can see. Now, this is a network representing how this model would relate from one concept to the other, looking at urban management and governance, environmental awareness, sustainability, urban livability, inclusivity, and the Hungarian city development. All of this making up a new paradigm in city development, especially for African cities. In terms of my methodology, we basically looked at this aspect of this research from the standpoint of collection of primary data from sampling, random sampling of people within the study area, which is Lokoja, North Central Nigeria. This Lokoja happens to be one of the colonial cities. It is the confluence of the River Niger and the River Benue. Currently, it has a household size. The total household in this area is estimated at about 35,000 from the last national housing census carried out. Now, dividing this by the household ratio for the city, we arrive at 284 sample size for 284 sample size for questionnaire administration, forming about 0.35% of the total sample frame of the area. And we administered questionnaires which dealt with the issues surrounding the indicators of the Hungarian city development. We used partial least square approach, structural equation modeling, to establish the linkage or interrelationship between the various indicators of this model. Excuse me. Now, in arriving at the result of our modeling, we use what we call the exploratory factor analysis, which help us to be able to determine the linkages and the weights of interrelationship between one factor and the other. Now, first of all, in using the partial least square approach of the structural equation modeling, we have two parts, which is the measurement model and the structural model. The measurement model, which is the first part of this modeling, looks at the weights of each indicator, the impact that each indicator has on the latent variable of the model. So here we have all of the indicators, as I have earlier said, which include, for environmental awareness, we're looking at motivation and value and environmental knowledge. For urban management and governance, we look at credit facilities and others. And you can see a web of interrelationship, significant interrelationship between one latent variable and the other as we go through the model moving. Now, in looking at this model, we discover, using the exploratory factor analysis, that for urban livability construct, 15 of the identified variables were actually found to be significant. That is, this significance is gotten from the weights of each of the indicators. And what we did was to ensure that any factor which has a weight of 0.7 is considered to be significant. And this is established in literature, as we can see for OK and Ogunsemi in 2016. Any factor which is above 0.7 is considered to be significant, and we retain them. And others which are below are actually eliminated. And for urban livability, we have 15 factors. For sustainability, we have 10 factors. And for inclusivity, we have 16 factors. We have 11 factors for environmental awareness and 22 factors for urban governance. 14 factors were retained for the Hungarian city development. And then that is how we arrive at the web of linkage that you have here in this model. Furthermore, in the course of carrying out our exploratory factor analysis, we were able to determine the reliability of our the latent variables, and we discovered that in terms of reliability, the benchmark for reliability is put at 0.7, but most of the factors which we considered had reliability that ranged between 0.8 and 0.9, which in fact shows that most of the indicators that we have tested are actually reliable and consistent. And this is the basis for our reliability. Now, going into our structural model, which has to do with the part coefficient of each of the indicators, that is showing the p-value and the significant value of each of these indicators. And this is what you have in this part diagram. But for a better understanding, we can see here. here you see all the factors, all the elements of this relationship were found to be supported by the p-value. The p-values are actually seen. Most of the indicators, such as the relationship between environmental awareness and its own indicator, which is environmental knowledge, we discovered that this relationship is actually supported at p-value equal to 0.00. The environmental awareness and the Hungarian city development is also supported at p-value equals 0.015. All of these are shown in this table, and they are actually supported, and they also serve as they also serve as hypotheses which were tested and found to be significant, and which were and we actually accepted all the alternative hypotheses for the tested variables. Now, for the path coefficient, we discovered that most of the latent variables were used actually scored above the benchmark of 0.7. They scored above 0.7, and they were found to be significant. We found that environmental awareness, urban management and governance, as well as the city's ability to live comfortably, as well as the city's ability to live sustainably, all had positive and relevant impact on the Hungarian city development. So what we're really saying is that in terms of sustainability and in terms of urban livability and inclusivity, all of them have significant value, which shows that they have linkage, they have impact and influence on the Hungarian city development model as far as the city of Lokoja is concerned. Furthermore, as I've said earlier, the hypothesized paths were actually found to be significant, and we accepted the alternate hypothesis in this. Now, when we're looking at the predictive relevance, which is the Q square, the predictive relevance basically talks about how much an indicator determines the eventual, what is the contribution of each indicator variable to the success of your model or the failure of the model. And in determining this, the endogenous variables, that is the individual indicator variables, were examined, and we discover that for any endogenous variable, values between 0 and -0 and greater than 0 are considered to be significant. And for our model, we discovered that the values for the endogenous variables range from -0.13 to +0.69, which shows that most of the variables of the Hungarian city model and its sub-construct actually determine to a very large extent the significance or the outcome of this model. The major findings is that the predictive relevance Q was used in this research, and it was determined using the blindfold method in the development. And then the question of the significance of the result is also established, and it is clearly shown in the model that most of the paths that were tested and the indicators that were tested are actually significant as far as the Hungarian city model is concerned. Now, our recommendation, having arrived at values of between -0.013 and +0.69, it is important to assert that the indicators for the model are actually significant, they are reliable, and can actually be used in the development of the city space, especially in Lokoja being the study area. Therefore, the concept is credible and it is recommended for the city. According to the research, using the smart PLS approach, which is a model, using the smart PLS, which is the the software that we have employed shows that our model is significant, it is applicable across the city of Lokoja, and can actually be tested going forward in other cities. Thank you very much for this time to present. I'll anchor it at this time.
Thank you. Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Sam, for that fantastic presentation. I'm now going to open the floor for 5 minutes. Actually, we have more because Sam has finished 4 minutes before his time was supposed to be up. So that means we have a bit more time for a discussion or an engagement with Sam's research. Colleagues, I open the floor now. What remarks, what comments, what questions do we have for Sam? Any questions? Any hands? Anyone who has any remark or comment to make? All right. Sam, thank you for your presentation.
Hello?
Yes, oh, wonderful. Thank you, yes. Okay, we have a question from Akande, and this colleague poses an important question. And the question is the Hungarian model synonymous to the utopia city concept? I will then, after, in fact, let's take the next question. So Sam, if you can just note, we have a question that has come in via the chat facility, and it's asking, is the Hungarian model synonymous to the utopia city concept? So keep that question in mind. Then let's have the question from our colleague. I don't know if it is Aliyu Kau. Let's hear your question. And so Sam will take all of the questions and then give you an opportunity to respond.
Hello. Good morning.
You. Yes. Good morning. Good morning.
Can you hear me? This is Aliyu Kau from Federal University of Technology in Nigeria. My question is this, knowing that the city of Lokoja is not ubiquitous, I mean, there are differences between...
I'm sorry, colleague, can you please just speak a little bit louder? We can't quite hear you. Okay. Can you just increase your volume?
Yes, I said since the city of Lokoja is not ubiquitous in terms of provision of facilities, can we say that this model can differentiate which part of the city is more or less in time while measured by this model? I mean, the results, which area is more livable, which area is more in agreement as Hungarian city? I hope you understand me. Yes, because the city is not ubiquitous. There are different areas, there are rich areas, there are poor areas, and then those in the middle. So, and so on and so forth. Those on plan and those that lack planning control. Are we saying that the whole city is like that? Anywhere you live, you have high model there, result there, or which? And then this comparison, can it be used city by city so that we know for a region which city is more livable than the other? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Sam, please confirm if you heard that question clearly.
Yes, I did hear the question clearly, and wonderful. It's noted.
Thank you. We have another hand that was raised, I think, by, who is this colleague? I can't quite remember. Please, the colleague who just raised their, Ayobami. You have the floor.
Hello. Thank you, Prof. Can you hear me? Good morning.
Thank you. Good morning.
All right. My question is just has to do with one, I saw the indicators that were used to measure the Hungarian city model. And I have quite some questions with regards to those indicators. One, the urban governance indicator was measured by population, family planning, city, credit facility, hospital network. And I asked some questions. Why hospital network within urban governance? Are we trying to look at the governance of health in this context? Because your indicator says hospital network service. You also measured urban governance by population, family planning. And I found out that almost all the indicators that were used to measure urban governance speaks to the Human Development Index, and which majorly captures the aspect of social sustainability. Only credit facility speaks to financial sustainability. But that was not the, and I asked, okay, why not capture these indicators or these measuring variables other than the urban governance? That was my first question. Why not financial sustainability, social sustainability, cultural sustainability as the case might apply? Also, one of the measuring indicator was sustainable urban development. And I saw the classification again. The classification was classified under financial, social. I couldn't remember the third one. And I asked, okay, if these, because when you look at SDG goals, you find that many of these, they might not be captured under the goal itself, but they can be captured under the targets for each of the goals. And that brings me to my final question to ask, how is this different from SDG goal? Would we have said, rather than saying it's a new agrarian city model, could we have said we are trying to establish indicators within SDG goal that fits into Africa, while we agree that SDG goals might be global and everything might not speak to the African needs, or in this case study, the need for lokoja? Could we have said that this model is actually testing of some sustainability goals, testing of variables that explain urban governance, so testing of variable that speaks to SDG, or whether inclusivity, as the case might be, to measure which one is mainly applicable to Africa or Lokoja, and not necessarily a Lokoja Anguillan model? Or are we saying that, okay, those goals that were applicable to Lokoja, as a scholar, is now being termed Anguillan city model? I think that calls for clarification from my own. Those are the questions. Thank you for the platform.
Prof, you are muted. Prof Yanga, you are muted.
Oh, sorry. Yes. I'm saying thank you, colleagues, for those thoughtful questions. Sam, you have about 3 minutes to
to respond.
Yes.
Okay. Let me start from the first question, which says, how is this different from the utopian city concept? Basically, what we try to achieve with the Hungarian city model is, and what I'm going to say now would actually affect the part of the address some of the last questions raised. And it is the fact that the Hungarian city model is actually a paradigm which looks at the intricate strength in existing models such as the environmental awareness, urban management and governance, sustainability, livability, and inclusivity. We're actually leveraging on the strength of all of these 5 models and see where are the points of intersection, both in literature and in actual reality. So we're able to look at their indicators as established in literature, and we tend to apply them. We transform these indicators into questions, which we took to sites for sampling. And each of these actually had a specific weight in terms of how the people could understand and relate with each of these indicators. So you will see that we started from about 200 indicators in the beginning. However, we're able to sustain just about less than 100 of these indicators, because some of these indicators were actually alien to the people within the city where we administer the questionnaire. So that means over the years, the cities in Africa have actually been judged from the lens of foreigners. So what we are arguing, as far as this research is concerned, is that if you are going to evaluate the African city, especially for a city like Lokoja, which we carry out this research, then we should be looking at that city from the Hungarian city model, which has indicators peculiar to the city of Lokoja in Kogi State. So the indicators are not actually our calling, really. They are indicators from extant literature, which we have domesticated within the African city system as it relates to Lokoja. And then we were able to see which of these indicators play prominent role in establishing this model. And that is why we have this outcome. Then somebody asked a question about the hospital network. Hospital network system basically talks about the arrangement of health infrastructure across space. The arrangement of health infrastructure across space. And please take note, this research is basically looking at infrastructure, development of space within the African city. So the hospital network system is looking at the infrastructure that relates with healthcare facilities, which is a very significant factor when you are appraising the city. Then there's a question that talks about the fact that the city is not ubiquitous, and then how does this model perform at specific places within the city. And I make bold to say that this model actually took the city. We use a random sampling method. We segregated the city of Lokoja into different neighborhoods, and we decided to sample 0.35% of the population of each of these various sectors. About 13 neighborhoods were identified for this city. And we took 0.35% of the total household size. And that is what cumulated together to give us the 284 questionnaire which we administered. And let me see, is there any other question that I have not? So basically what we are saying is that this model can actually be applied across Lokoja in terms of, and in some of the outcome that we got in other parts of the research is that we're able to segregate the different neighborhoods within Lokoja and how these indicators actually perform for each of these areas within the city. Also, I'm not forgetting the fact that this research, the main research itself is a regional research in North Central Nigeria. So we're able to look at the performance of this model in different aspects, different parts of North Central Nigeria, not Lokoja alone, but that is the subject for other parts of the research. I hope I have been able to attend to some of the questions, except. Thank you,
Sam. You are certainly persuasive and certainly well informed about this particular topic. If we had a time, we would engage you further, but I think we will make time towards the end, and we'll see if we have about 10 minutes where we can engage this sort of questions. But thank you for a fantastic presentation and a great engagement. Colleagues, we are going to move on to our next presentation. It's going to be given our colleague, Dr. Akande, who is going to be presenting to us about a GIS-based approach that was used to study small hydropower potential assessment. I'm not sure if I understood that clearly, along the River Ogun in Nigeria. Please, Dr. Akande, take the floor.
Good morning, everyone. Hello.
Yes, good morning, colleague. We can hear you.
Okay. Akonde Olaide Sharifdin, a PhD candidate from Federal University of Technology, Minna, Nigeria. Please, my slide is not on. I thought you'll be projecting from there. Hello? Or am I supposed to share my screen?
Probably muted, Prof.
Hello?
Yes, please share your presentation.
Okay, then let me. It's up, I guess. Hello?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay. Good morning.
Create on presentation
And
mode,
I'll
please.
be presenting.
Can we just ask you to slide share?
Yeah, I'll do that.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah.
Okay, I'll be presenting on behalf of my team. And the title of my presentation is GIS-based approach to small hydropower potential assessment along River Ogun in Nigeria. Electricity, or in other words, energy as it is popularly called, has a positive correlation with development. And this has been established in many literatures. For example, the achievement of most developmental indicators like water, health, sustainability, climate action lies heavily with the achievement of electricity access. However, we must understand that energy or electricity access is still a global challenge. Recently, in 2018, the International Energy Agency reported that over 2 billion people in the world do not have access to electricity. And when we come down to sub-Saharan Africa, in 2021, the World Bank reported that about 597 million people do not have access to electricity. And because of this, the daunting nature of this problem, the debate on electricity access has continued to resurface on many global developmental agendas, such as the SDGs and others. And argument or the debate on energy access has gone beyond the issue of access alone. It has snowballed to the issue of access to clean energy, affordable, reliable, and sustainable energy. And these tenets are captured in the SDGs goal, particularly Goal 7, which seeks to achieve affordable energy for all, and Goal 13, climate action. Coming down to Nigeria, like many sub-Saharan African countries in the world, are experiencing many developmental challenges, of which energy access is one. The World Bank in 2021 estimated that we have about 85 million Nigerians that do not have access to electricity. And many of this population lives in the rural area, probably far away from the national grid or due to some logistical constraints such as topography. And this issue of energy access has been the bane of our development in the country. Having highlighted some of the energy challenges in the world and in Nigeria in particular, we could see that if we must achieve the SDGs target for by the year 2030, concerted effort must be put in place towards achieving all-inclusive energy access across the urban and rural areas. And notable among some of the, Poor People's Energy Outlook in 2017 also alluded to this argument that if we must provide energy or electricity for our people, then we must promote the issue of renewable energy, particularly off-grid and on-grid energy systems. And notable among the renewable energy option that is globally popular, that is common across the globe, is hydropower. Hydropower comes in different sizes. We have the large-scale hydropower. These are plants, hydropower plants that produces energy of about 100 megawatts of electricity, while the small hydropower mostly are hydropower plants that produces less than 10 megawatts of electricity. Although this definition differs from country to country, as some countries allow up to 30 megawatts electricity for small hydropower. For the purpose of this study, we are focusing on the small hydropower because of its numerous advantages. We can say today, China, Brazil, and some of the developed countries of the world are relying on small hydropower to provide energy for our teeming population. For example, China has over 224,000 small hydropower plants, and Brazil has over 158, and the likes. However, the choice of small hydropower comes as a result of its flexibility, the ease of construction, and the less social and environmental implication that comes with it compared to the large hydropower and other forms of off-grid energy system like solar, which is not reliable because of the variability of weather and other conditions. So it is also instructive to know that Nigeria is blessed with abundant water resources. About 12.4% of Nigerian landmass is covered with water. However, only 20% of Nigeria's electricity is generated from hydropower. Specifically, only 12 of the 36 states of the country has been surveyed for hydropower potentials using the traditional method, which takes time with huge cost implications. The advancement in technology, particularly GIS and remote sensing, has made the survey of small hydropower much easier and cost-effective, and it has been demonstrated in many literatures. GIS approach to identifying small hydropower has been exemplified in studies, in local studies and international studies in recent times. For example, the study of Fasikpe, Eshra, and Alexandros. However, these studies that have demonstrated the use of GIS approach to small hydropower potential do not really match the demand within reasonable, the demand for electricity within reasonable distance of this potential hydropower site, because since the energy generated from some of these sites are in small quantum, are in small quantity, you don't expect them to be transported over a large distance where you lose most part of the energy generated. And it is based on this argument that this study examines small hydropower potentials along River Ogun using GIS-based approach with a view to determining the viability of the energy potentials for an inclusive development of the area, be it rural or the urban area. The study area is Ogun River, which is located in Ogun State. And Ogun State is one of the states in Nigeria in the southwestern region of the country. Ogun has numerous rivers aside Ogun State has numerous rivers within aside River Ogun, some of which include River Oba, River Onya, and Oshun River. However, River Ogun is the longest river and a permanent river within Ogun State. The major source of electricity within this state is from the national grid. So most people within Ogun State rely on the national grid for our electricity as the primary source of electricity. Then I would like to give a brief about the methodology of the work. First, I would like to discuss the data used. The data used include, we have the GIS data, particularly that's the remote sensing data that were used to be able to estimate the small hydropower potentials along this river. We have the SRTM, which is shuttle radar topographical mission of 0.0083 degrees, which is equivalent to about 90-degree resolution. This raster data was gotten from the United States Geological System server, while runoff and precipitation data for Africa was downloaded from Baldwin et al. In 2017, because we don't have many stations within the country that can give adequate information on the runoff pattern in the area. So we relied on the runoff and precipitation data developed by Day1 et al. 2017. The communities within 2-kilometer radius of this of River Ogun were also identified, or we identified from OpenStreetMap. They were downloaded and grant-rooted. That means we had to visit to ensure that actually those communities exist within the actual location. The ones that were not there were removed. And the energy access, that is in terms of connectivity, quality, affordability, and the likes, was assessed as well. And the administrative shapefile of the area was downloaded from Nigerian survey site. The methodology for this work basically is spatial analysis pertaining to the identification of small hydropower. And the framework for the identification is displayed in the figure by the left, which shows where we started the analysis from using the DEM, which we call the SRTM, and many functional tools of hydrology were used, from field tool to the flow direction to the flow accumulation. We had to resample the DEM at some stage, convert it to integer to get the runoff pattern. We also needed to know what the head is, what we call the slope, or the head for the hydropower generation, which was determined using focal statistics and the likes. And this is a breakdown of how the analysis goes. Then on the side, we have simple descriptive statistics that were used to report some of the findings, and the energy potential exactly was calculated using Caro et al.'s formula for energy calculation. Findings. And first, we want to talk about the characteristics of the river, because it's from these characteristics of the river that we're able to identify the potential areas. These are some of the brief characteristics of the river. The river is about 118 kilometers long, and the maximum elevation along the river is 103, and the minimum is 1. And we can see a profile of the riverbed below, showing the relief within the riverbed, how water flows. And we can see a kind of undulating nature, although flowing towards from north to south. Then secondly is the issue of slope and discharge. The slope, otherwise known as the head, which is the difference, the vertical difference in height, and the discharge flow are the key components that are needed to determine the energy potentials that can be generated along the riverbed. And here we have that the minimum slope along the riverbed is about 0.3 meter, while the maximum is 24.3. We have the flow rate for runoff along the riverbed, both annual, the minimum and the maximum, as displayed here in the table. And we can see that the maximum annual river flow is about 183.4 cubic meter per annum. That's averagely, but the maximum is 658 cubic meter. And these are some of the indicators that were used to determine the potential small hydropower site in the study area. Having identified those characteristics, we are able to determine the number of potential sites that can be used to generate electricity along the river. And we're able to identify 57 potential sites. The energy that will be generated from this potential site, we are categorized into three. First, between 0.5 to 1 megawatt of electricity. Then second, between 1 megawatt and 3 megawatts of electricity, and between 3 megawatts to about 5.7 or 5.8 megawatts of electricity. We see that majority of the potential sites have energy potentials of about 1 to 3 megawatts of electricity. The diagram here shows the location and the spatial distribution of the 57 potential hydropower sites along the river course from the north to the south. These potential sites cut across 5 local government areas, mostly rural, except Abeokuta North and the Abeokuta South. The total energy to be generated from the potential site were also estimated. And we can see that the minimum potential energy that can be generated from this potential site is about 0.5 megawatts of electricity to a maximum of about 5.7 megawatts of electricity. In total, about 75.38 megawatts of electricity can be generated from this potential site identified along River Ogun, which is huge when it comes to energy generation. Having identified the potential energy and the quantum of energy that can be generated along the potential site, we conducted a survey to identify the communities along the river within 2-kilometer radius of the river on both sides, and a total of 58 communities were identified along this community of along River Ogun, which stretches for about 118 kilometers. Of the 58 communities identified, 57 are core rural communities, mostly hamlets and villages. Only one, which is Abeokuta, the capital of Ogun State itself, is an urban area. All the 57, it is also instructive to know that all the 57 hamlets and villages identified do not have access to electricity. That is, they are not connected to the energy grid. They rely on private energy system, particularly generators, for those that can afford it, which shows the level of energy poverty along the river where energy potentials are available. So this, to a large extent, has shown that there is demand for energy, for this energy if they are developed, that these communities can benefit from these energy potentials along this riverbed without being transported over a large distance. The map here shows the spatial distribution of the communities along the riverbed. And I'll go to the next. Having done that, we'll also try to identify the potential number of households that can benefit from the potential energy generated along, that will be generated along River Ogun. And we did that at 3 levels. One, we are assuming we have 100% generation of the potential energy. That's if the small hydropower plants are working at 100%, 75%, and 50% respectively. And it was observed that going by the benchmark of 250 kilowatts per household per annum standard provided by International Energy Agency for African communities, particularly sub-Saharan African countries, we are able to understand that at least 22,000 households with a minimum of 5 persons can benefit from the energy potentials if the small hydropower plants are working at 100%. At 75%, about 16,530 households are likely to benefit, and at 50%, about 11,020 households are likely to benefit. This has shown that developing small hydropower along this route, along the river course, will take a large population away from energy poverty, at least provide them with the basic energy that they can use to function normally without any hindrance to any developmental issues such as pumping of water, education for their students, their healthcare centers. You can provide them with this energy. And in conclusion, the study concluded that ample energy potentials are bound along River Ogun. Many of these communities, however, do not have access to electricity, so we can say the energy, the small hydropower potential along this area is viable. The demand for energy potential is within available minimum distance of 2 kilometers, and hence we can adopt GIS as a tool to make easy the identification of small hydropower potential for regional development in Ogun State. Some of the key recommendations is that based on this, the finding of the study and some of the existing law in the country, if small hydropower development, if we must meet the target of the SDGs, Goal 7 particularly, the country needs to review our energy policy to allow for energy democratization and decentralization. We must move away from the national grid issue to decentralize the energy system to allow for the development of small hydropower plants that will cater for community off-grid or for communities that are far away from the national grid in order to ensure an inclusive provision of electricity for everyone, regardless of your location or the geographical terrain where your community is. We also recommend that we should embark on feasibility and viability study of existing water bodies in the country using GIS-based approach rather than the traditional approach, which is costly, time-consuming, and with great environmental implication. Thank you.
Thank you, Akande. Thank you, colleague. That was great. I'll open the floor for questions or comments or remarks. Colleagues, we have 5 minutes to offer questions, remarks and comments and engage Akande on his presentation. Thank you. Nompumelelo Zuma, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. At the moment, I don't have questions. I'd just like to say thank you for the presentations. They're very informative and they're eye-opening. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Nompumelelo. Colleagues, any remarks, any questions, any reflections on Akande's presentation?
Yes.
Thank you.
Good morning once again, Ali Ukahu on the line.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, colleague, go ahead.
Yeah, please, I want to stress out some points. I know this is an abstract of a paper or a larger work, but I want to draw the attention of the presenter to the following. Is you keep about the megawatt production and so on of the proposed project, power project. Is it per day or per year or so? Because that's how they are rated. This power plant can produce this megawatt per day or per day, and so on, per year and so on. If you put that will improve more on the paper. Then secondly, we need to for you to say that you are making a recommendation, you have done this work, you have done. I think you need to also insert where you have carry out a survey. What is the power need of these communities? So that we don't go and put a power plant in a place and it can only serve half of the community, or it cannot even serve them at all. We need to know what is the need of these communities. Okay, I think if you do that, it will also add to his paper. And then the negative impact, we know that hydropower stations has negative impact. That's why a lot of people discourage it, both downstream and upstream, particularly in this part of Nigeria that I was talking about. A lot of people depend on this river for their livelihood. So by the time you dam it, you're definitely going to have problem. If it is not done, what is the likely negative or positive impact that's there? If there is not going to be, you need to have a section to dissuade that fear that no, this is a different model which does not provide, which does not bring this negative impact and so on and so forth. So these are my contributions. Very good work. Thank you, and I wish you all the best.
Colleague, Akande, please, actually, let's first wait and see if there are any other questions or comments. Do we have any other questions or comments? Okay, so Akande, please go ahead and respond to Aliu's question.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me start with the first question on the issue of whether the energy estimated, the potentials energy are daily, yearly, or the energy that we estimated along the river course as expected to be on daily basis, because it's a perennial, it's a permanent water on daily basis. As long as the plant is there, it will keep generating that quantum of energy per day. Is per day. What we are calculating, where we'll be talking about per capita per annum, is when we are trying to determine what volume of electricity the household consumes. And that's where I was talking about 250 kilowatts per hour per annum for a household, as highlighted by the International Energy Agency, having conducted their survey for what a typical household would need to be able to power some bulbs, charge their phones, television, and some basic household amenities. And secondly, the issue of energy demand of the household. Like I said, these communities are rural communities, and it was almost difficult for us to be able to identify or estimate the exact population. Although majority of these communities are hamlets that require little, with less population compared to larger communities and villages. So we're not able to estimate the energy demand per se of each of the communities, since we don't have the information on the household population or the population of the communities, as it were. Then lastly, the issue of impact. The issue of impact is one of the advantages that comes with small hydropower. Small hydropower does not require dam. They are not dammed. You don't need to dam the water. That's why they call it runoff kind of system for energy generation. And it comes with, you don't need to displace any community. You are not digging. There's no downstream or upstream impact that comes with it. We said it comes with less social and environmental implication, because there are some machines, because of the advancement in technologies, there are numerous machines now that are just lifted and dropped into the water without any basic construction. You don't need to construct anything. We only need to identify where those edge, where I was talking about the slope, where the slope lies, that we hit the turbines that will drive the energy generation. So it has minimal impact, and the issue of impact is never a concern when it comes to small hydropower potential compared to other off-grid energy systems. I hope I've been able to provide answers to this question.
Thank you, Akande. I think you did answer sufficiently. My own question that came to mind after listening to your presentation, after hearing you tell us that, we have so many communities, particularly in the rural space in Nigeria, who don't have power. And in this particular region where you conducted research, they don't have energy, and yet alongside where they reside, they have this river that has the potential to provide them with energy if these small hydropower interventions are used. So then my question becomes, who are we communicating these kinds of findings to? How are we translating this kind of knowledge so that policymakers are able to take it up, development agencies, development partners, anyone in Nigeria who is positioned to do something about the provision of power or energy for communities that don't have it? Any policy briefs that you have been able to develop, how have you been communicating these findings?
Okay, thank you very much. I think to respond to your question, one of the stumbling blocks in the issue of small hydropower potential development, particularly in Nigeria, is because of some of our policies. There's this policy we have in the country, Nigeria, that says any power generated above, any power of more than 1 megawatt generated must be transported back to the national grid. And this policy has discouraged private investment in small hydropower development, since whatever you generated, whatever you are generating must be transported back to the national grid for distribution to users. So private people, communities are not taking up that initiative to be able to do that because you can't handle it. Because the core concept of small hydropower is that it's an off-grid system. It is expected to provide energy for communities that cannot be connected to the national grid. And when you now say, if I'm producing, for some of the sites, we have potential sites that are producing energy of up to 3 megawatts of electricity, 5 megawatts. That means if this energy is generated, they have to be transported back to the national grid. And when this the transmission is done to the national grid, you will definitely lose some of this energy. So even if it's coming back, you will not get the same amount that you've generated at the initial stage, which may not be very viable for investors that want to invest in such development. And that is why in my recommendation, one of the core recommendations is that we need to review our policy to make it liberal, to allow for democratization of energy generation, democratization and decentralization of energy generation. Instead of sticking to this national grid idea, we must break the national grid to be able to provide our people with energy, regardless of their location, whether in the rural areas, whether in the urban areas. Like we see, the state capital, Abeokuta, that is also having deficit in energy access. There is great potential along the river within the state capital that can be generated. However, because of this law, it has become an impediment to the development of small hydropower in the country. And for who are we expected to transmit this information to? Like the only thing this work is expected to do is for us to make it public through conferences like this and journal publication for the authorities to be able to see and understand. And that's why we are selling this idea to them, that it is now much easier to identify energy potentials using GIS, and you can also use it to determine the viability. Where it is not viable, you don't need to develop them. If the potential is there, but there are no communities within, we can jettison them. But where we have communities and their energy potential, we can actually take advantage of those potential to provide energy to this community and relieve the national grid of such burden. Thank you.
Thank you, Akanda. I wish we had more time. We would be able to talk about various ways that we can use our research to engage policymakers. How we can use our research for advocacy and lobbying. All right, but thank you so much.
Some other time to have
some other time, yes. Thank you, thank you. Colleagues, we're now moving on to our third presentation. We have our colleagues from Nelson Mandela University here in South Africa, who have conducted a research to explore the potential to use multipurpose community centers as catalysts of socio-economic development in South Africa. And they've done their work in a province here in South Africa called the Eastern Cape. And the person will be presenting on behalf of a group from Nelson Mandela University is Bongiwe Kobe. Bongiwe, I hope you are in the room. I don't see a Bongiwe Kobe. If Bongiwe is not presenting, do we have someone who's going to present on their behalf? I don't see any of the co-authors. But if you are here and you are here to present on behalf of Bongiwe Kobe or Professor Mbanga and Professor Brinkwater, please take the floor. Okay, it seems, Sam, that we don't have these colleagues.
Prof, Bongiwe Kobe was present. I don't know, maybe she's encountered some issues, but she was present.
Is there any way of contacting her? Maybe send an email just to, maybe she went off not knowing that her time would come up so soon. Maybe let's just give 2 minutes for...
Yeah, let's give.
Yes, just for the organizers, but I think someone needs to alert her that we are waiting for her.
Okay, I'll facilitate that. Just maybe 2 minutes will be fine. And then if not, then we can continue to the other presentation.
To the last presentation. Okay,
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, colleagues. So we have 2 minutes that we're going to allow for Bongiwe to join us. Thank you.
Hello.
Is there someone? Do we have some? We are waiting for Bongiwe. We thought we would just give her 2 minutes, and we asked Ulwandile to contact her and make sure
Yeah,
she's
just
okay.
contact you, Sam. Yeah, Sam, please check your message on WhatsApp.
All right. Okay, colleagues, another minute.
Prof. Maybe Prof can just round off since this person is not here. The slide is here, but we cannot seem to lay our hand on this presenter.
On the presentation, all right.
We have
Okay,
the presentation, but he's not logged in. We have tried to make contact, unfortunately, without any success.
Okay, then. All right. So I agree. Let's move on to Prof. Coleman Jordan, who's going to be introduced by Lwandile. And if Bongiwe should join us, she will then take the slot that would have been Prof. Jordan's. All right, Lwandile, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Prof. Yes, our last presenter is Prof. Coleman. I think he's an assistant professor for architecture from the University of Morgan State in the United States, coming from the School of Architecture and Urban Planning. He'll be presenting on the irrevocably homeless, which is a curve for psychological home exclusion of Africans living in Europe. I think he's been with us since the beginning of these presentations. So thank you for your patience, and the floor is yours.
Okay. Let me get my presentation up. Okay, can you see the presentation? Can you see the presentation and can you hear me?
Yes, we can see it, Prof. We can hear you and
you.
we can see the presentation.
All right, so I'm going to start off, I'm going to read a small statement basically coming from my abstract before I take off. Now, this is a work in progress, so this is not a solution at the time. This is actually a work in progress in the direction that I'm looking at developing a specific documentation for this specific article. So irrevocably homeless, psychological home exclusion of Africans living in Europe. And thank you, I'm from Morgan State University. and I do teach in the architecture program and the graduate program specifically. And one of the issues that has caught my attention when we are looking at the concepts of urbanity, and when we talk about the African urbanity and the African diaspora urbanity, trying to begin to understand what housing looks like, and this concept before you could even get housing, and issues that are based around homelessness. Now, the approach that I'm actually taking, there are a couple of different chapters that I'm looking at. This one that I'm going to be presenting today looks more, is geared towards the migrants and refugees, more so than looking at just the homeless situation, but how they begin to come into these realms of Europe. So reading off this quote that I'm going to start off with. Perhaps home is not a place, but simply an irrevocable condition. So by the author, writer James Baldwin. This quote by Baldwin reflects the spatial and psychological racial divide in housing for many African diaspora peoples. Rising racial incidents, whether an immigrant, refugee, or those of an enslaved history, the diasporic African often find themselves in a conditional state of dwelling versus a place called home. This article aims to investigate the connection between racial experiences and discrimination and violence and the psychological effects of diasporic Africans, a perception of being a foreigner forever in their adopted Western country. Using a cross-sectional analysis, this article analysis looks at the rise of racial discrimination and violent incidences in Europe from 2016 to 2020. During this period, the influences of the Trump presidency in the US and Brexit in the United Kingdom were cannon fodder for the European public. These results were measured against anti-racial protests in the United States and the European Index of Housing Exclusion in the European Union Agency for Fundamental Rights, the document titled The European Union Minorities and Discrimination Survey, which is subtitled Being Black in the EU. The overwhelming results of Africans from the survey found that the rise in racism played the most significant role in sustaining an outsider perception of us, this in quotes, the irrevocable home condition of a foreigner, and, quote, them, the European nationalist homeowner. So right now, this study doesn't answer, but this study is going to answer and look at the issues based around it regarding the conditions of homeless state of mind for the Africans in Europe. Due to the recent political changes in the United States and the refugee status of Africans fleeing Ukraine from the Russian onslaught, further studies are needed to establish current psychological statistics of home stability among the African populations in Europe. So homelessness is not a new issue. We're familiar with it. This is in Paris, in front of the Capitol in Paris, where there were protests, and I believe it's 2019. That was actually looking at the issues of homelessness, where over 300 tents and homeless were put out. Now, this is a combination of homelessness issues in general. This is not just specifically looking at the context of the African within the homeless state. However, being in Europe, being in another country, being in another context of land, I start to look at the issues based around the treatment. So I did mention the treatment of Ukrainians, that are coming out now into Europe, being generally more welcome than the Africans that have been studying and living in Ukraine that are coming out as well. There's a different response, a different reaction to that, which stems from what I would call systemic racism within the global context, which is why the Pan-Africanism of this conference, but Pan-Africanism of dwelling and the Pan-Africanism of housing is quite critical in understanding the state of mind when you are in another land in particular, and how you begin to respond to that psychologically. So, well, we're all familiar with the migrants that have been coming abroad, especially across the Mediterranean, many living out of places such as Libya, looking for their sort of promised land. Many of these migrants are young men. Many of them are not educated, have not had the opportunity to have the education in their own country, which is a part of the problem, a part of the issue. When I say a part of the problem, meaning about homelessness, but also about sustaining your own home and understanding what home actually means, and leaving that space, without the resources, without the capability, and with a few skills coming into an industrialized country, industrialized nation. It becomes problematic, as we have seen in the news many times. So again, this is just the sort of imagery that's relating to the context and understanding why, again, the Pan-African context of understanding the larger issues around globalization matters, and how we are living and dwelling in these spaces. So I've run across articles, these general articles coming out of the news. I also have academic articles that you'll see later. But the news headlines are actually quite critical because it sets the tone for how we are beginning to understand the relationship to one another. And one another meaning when you're going from one country to another country to another. So thousands of refugees are actually suffering mental health crises. It's not talked about much. I can tell you in the US in particular, just as I'm coming from the US, issues around Blackness and mental health have always been quite taboo. It's taboo in the sense that not having as much access, not having as much education around these issues for minorities in particular. But also it's been taboo in the context of the conversation generally does not start with the health facilities and being able to have that conversation, meaning that there's a sense of the health facilities are geared towards those, I would say, popular culture, those that are not part of the minority. So they deal with the majority, and in the US at least. So this actually stems to the greater populations when you're talking about refugee status and those coming into migrant or immigrant cultures as well, specifically when you're looking at the African context. The state of mental health is often ignored, whether it's a cultural context by those of African descent, and or it's the health context within the country, the European country specifically that I'm referring to, that is not taking that as a serious context of understanding the implications of those that are coming into their country. So this it's a critical issue that has been ignored and something that needs to be looked at further. And moving on, again, this is just another representation of the homelessness of the African refugees that have been coming in and how their treatment is very different from other refugees that are coming from Europe. And the majority of Europeans refugees are actually coming from Europe and not from Africa. The majority of African refugees are actually in Africa, and they're going to places like Kenya, which has one of the largest refugee camps, I think globally. But the context, and this is why, again, I'm using a lot of the media to begin to look at how it has played a role in advertising the sort of negativity aspects of the African as we go along. So this type of concept where you start to begin to get rallies against or sort of understanding why these rallies or why these refugees or these people have been mistreated versus others. you start to see articles like this where it says, well, we did not survive the NATO war in Libya to die on the streets of Hamburg. Now, this situation here is being resolved. This is when the Italians were actually, Italian community or Italian government literally shipped those from Hamburg, gave them visas into Germany to actually reside without the German government actually giving that viability to actually happen. So there are a number of refugee camps throughout Europe, and it's sporadically spread throughout, with the majority of them around the Netherlands, Belgium, and also in England and those areas. And then you also have those within Greece and Turkey, right around these border regions, which become quite critical. The border regions and the edge regions, also one of the more critical areas is in Italy. We have the distance matters coming from the African continent, as well as in Spain. Those sort of primary points of entry that begin to become critical, but then places like England, places like Germany, places like France begin to become the hot spots as being the industrial leaders of Europe, and where it becomes the land of milk and honey for many of the immigrants and migrants coming into the countries. So statistically, since these are, now when I started this research, this was actually just prior to the pandemic. So I've had to go back and start to look at what the pandemic has actually done and where we are today with many of these issues. But since 2010, most of the years have seen a rise in the tide of migrants coming in from sub-Saharan Africa to Europe, mostly driven by economy, meaning that the economy and some wars, especially areas where there's political upheaval or non-political issues, meaning that there's no politics that's stable, such as in Libya, where they're having more flight coming in. Now, there's a difference between male and female, and the differences as far as why one is leaving versus the other. So that image that I showed you of the males, the young men coming in, again, that's coming from a general sense of those that don't have the ability to sustain themselves in their own country, often because of education or because of a lack of skills in certain areas. Now, when we talk about women, which I'll show those statistics as well, there's a bit of a difference in the sense of why they're leaving their countries. Now here you have the main countries of departure: Nigeria, Ghana, South Africa, Kenya. They stand out as the origin countries for sub-Saharan migrants that are living in both the US and Europe. So you have statistics here and to the 200,000 with the Nigerian. You have Ghana here at 160,000. And then if you look down, this is in the US, but when you look down into the EU in particular, and this is my main focus, is looking at European, not the US as much, but you still have high figures with Nigeria, South Africa in this case, Somalia, and Ghana still around the same or close numbers. All right, so about half or more in several sub-Saharan African countries. These are coming from the Pew Research Center, but these statistics are actually showing those that are actually have the desire to leave and to move out of their country. And the numbers are quite high at this point, but what I've begun to notice in recent studies is that these numbers have actually been shrinking, especially in, I would say, Ghana, I believe, and Nigeria, and Kenya. Actually, those numbers I know have been shrinking little by little as far as those that are looking for a means of opportunity to leave. And if they do leave, more are actually coming back of recent. And I believe that's probably the push for understanding the high racial instances that are beginning to happen in Europe, but as well as in the Americas, but also beginning to find means to come back and to be empowered by this Pan-African movement, such as the conference that we're having today. I think there's a reflection, residue of that's actually beginning to happen. Sub-Saharan Africans have personal ties often within the US and Europe. And that is one of the bridges that has actually continued to allow these connections to happen because of the connections from historically as well as recent connections of families being in these areas. And you see Senegal has a high connection into the European aspects as well, and Ghana as well as some of the higher elements and components driving in. When we look at the suffering of women, as there's a different sense of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, which is happening among men and women that are coming in because they're leaving trauma from whether it's wars or whether it's political stress or whether it's economic stress or food shortages. Those stresses, in particular with women, tend to not be economic in the context of the young men that are coming in. However, of late, it's happening more and more where women are leaving to travel to Europe for economic reasons, but most have been more physical treatments, whether it's by the spouse or it's often very gender related, spouse or other threats by gangs or rape and pillage in certain areas where there's war-torn regions. And so they're leaving for matters of physical threats more so than economic threats. And you also have food shortages, and for survival for their children and for the youth is to pick up and leave for a greater sensibility, but not leaving the same mental concept of leaving their land, where the majority of the statistics that I was showing before were those that wanting to leave are majority men, young men that are looking to leave. And here along the side, these are statistics of women in these particular areas that have chosen to leave. So Western Africa being the highest mark, along with Central Africa being next, and down. So as migrants and refugees are coming into these countries, there's an element of acculturation that has been argued about within some of the articles that I've been looking at and reading, where they talk about 4 strategies in particular of migrants that need to adapt to begin to qualify a sense of home in a European status, in a European context. One is assimilation. Assimilation being that you begin to become that European. Now these are terminologies that have been defined through, actually to qualify that research. You can ask me about it later, and I have that research in another paper. But the assimilation in this sense is looking at almost becoming European. It's almost ignoring your own culture and becoming what it is that you feel like you need to be to survive. Separation leads to the segregation within communities, which is what we live through on a day-to-day basis in many of North American cities, but also within European cities, where you have segregations within communities and you begin to create almost immigrant ghettos or refugee ghettos that begin to become placed without, which divides a country, let alone dividing a community of people. You also have the integration, which is seen as to be the better of the two, where you keep your own culture, and you learn the other culture. So there's an element of learning and unlearning, but you've got to create a bridge to begin to allow for a more smoother transition to begin to happen. This is the one that is the more the one more worthy of calling it home, I guess, being more homeful. The marginalization is the sense of ignoring the culture that you're actually moved into, and also ignoring your own culture. And that's the lesser of the 4 as far as being able to become adapted to these situations. Within that element of acculturation, there are certain elements that begin to talk, the sort of educational sojourners as well as the economic immigrants, as far as how to begin to, again, survive, or what the effects are within these elements of the domains of comparison between the two. So in that sense, there are just a couple that I'll just point out today. But the first one, priority goal for relocation. So what is the goal of that relocation? If it's educational, that acculturation is about learning and acquiring competences and a second culture. So that culture that you're moving to. And economic immigrants, it's improvement of material standards of living. So they're trying to up their standards of living where they've not been able to in their own country. If you go down to a lifestyle, here lifestyle, you have more of a demand, but enjoyable due to cognitive activities and progress and skill acquisition for the educated and the educational component. Where in the economic element, where you start to have more hardships, you have hard work to maximize earnings and thrift to maximize savings. So it becomes part of the stress within the society. So you're coming into a society, you're stressed, you're mentally, it's a strain on you as well. And you're in a different culture, a different climate, a different environment altogether. Some of the other social contacts you have often as far as education, with local majority members of facilitating immersion within programs. You start to begin to become immersed within society, where you are coming in for economic immigrants that are more sufferable. They're usually within home country or in-group, they're more isolated within the larger majority, and it becomes more problematic. So these are just elements that begin to cause some of the stress and strain within society. And again, if they're not looked at and not taken serious within a specific culture, then it become a problem. You begin to become the problem within a society that is the majority, society that is the dominant society, which causes the problems economically. So again, what I mentioned, the largest refugee camps that I'm familiar with are actually in Kenya, who actually receives more immigrants and migrants than anyone else. However, media would not have you believe that. As a matter of fact, it wasn't until I started a lot of this research, I started to realize the majority of immigrants and refugees are actually within Africa itself and not Europe. However, the problem is seen more so in Europe through media because of the popular media that we are looking at in our news reads. So these are just some of the camps and the numbers within the countries that exist within the African continent itself. So you can see the numbers are quite high. One of the issues when living in these refugee camps, these are in Europe, as well as in some of the African ones, but some of the negative aspects as well as positive. This grid system that's often put in place with immigrants and refugees that are coming into the city, it causes a socialist dynamic. You could be a doctor, you could be someone that cleans, depending on your background, whatever you are. If you're coming in as a refugee, you begin to live in a more socialistic type of a forced community. Less privacy is one of the issues that pops up. It begins to become quite the issue where it tends to perpetuate a state of homelessness because these spaces in particular, when many of the camps that are being created now, many have been there for over 10 years, if not even longer, because situations have not changed or because they have housing lacks within the urban setting. And so when we talk about housing, when we talk about elements of living within the city or understanding how we begin to create homes for those to live in, we have to begin to understand those that are invisible or those that are in the middle, that are in the middle state right now that have no place to be. But this begins to become that new environment, that new city for them. So these grids, they become surveillance places, so people can see there is an element of safety, but there's also an element of not having privacy. And again, everyone in that one sense is equal, which could be a good thing and something we could learn from. But another, it becomes also very, how do I put it? It's not an ideal space of living because you're not yourself within this type of a condition. Now, there are new developments that continue to be built. This is in Germany right now. They're looking at how to begin to give value or a sense of integrity to those that are coming in from other countries, immigrants and refugees in particular, and how to allow them to look like they're a part of society without creating camps of this nature, but beginning to create camps of this nature, more equal to the understanding of how we understand Western design and Western spaces. Okay, so this is one of the spaces again in Germany where they're actually collecting information from immigrants and refugees that are moving into the space. Again, it's a systematic element. This is a tinted area. They're taking information and documentation. And it's just the element, the space of recording. So I want to close with this image in particular. And in the beginning, I talked about the racial upheaval that has been happening in the US. I can talk to that specifically, but then also in Europe in particular, where there's this sort of I would say a passive aggressive type of racism or racism that hasn't been talked about much. The voices are not allowed as probably the African-American voice here in the US. But this incident, which many of you may be familiar with, where 3 soccer youth that were actually British subjects, they lived in Britain, and missed their goals, and they all of a sudden had these sense of attacks that came upon them afterwards, racist attacks. So the one thing that the reason I end with this is because although we talked about immigrants and migrants at the beginning of this and how coming into a European culture that is foreign to the African continent, but trying to understand how to begin to live and have a home in that type of a space. The one thing that this type of image to me reflects is that even when you think you're at home, even when you've been born, when you're Black in this world at this point in time, not just when you're Black, when you're African at this point in time of the world in 2022, you still may not be home. So your home may not feel like your home. Thank you.
Wow, excellent. Thank you, Prof. Jordan. That was brilliant. It's a presentation that I think I find extremely exciting because of the way it compels us to have these conversations about who truly belongs in our cities, in the cities of the world, who can belong. What would it take for the city to have the conditions that you need for it to be a home for all? And you pointing out, of course, the sad and brutal reality for Africans everywhere in the world that often the African cannot belong there. The conditions are not conducive to create that sense of home and the sense of citizenship and the sense that one belongs and is welcome. So it's a sad study, a sad kind of research, but one that I think is extremely necessary. Colleagues, we are opening the floor for quick questions or remarks or comments. As you can tell, this is the sort of topic or presentation that I could talk on forever. But I'm not the person who's meant to be engaging, or at least not the only one. So I am opening the floor. Any remarks, any questions that you have for Prof. Jordan? Any remarks, colleagues? Okay. Prof, I will reserve my own comments for when we close, because we've just been told that Bongiwe is available to present the presentation that should have actually taken place during the slot that you occupied. So I am going to thank you again for a really thoughtful and brilliant and very necessary and important conversation. and then invite Ubongiwe. Yes, I do see you now. Ubongiwe, you have the floor to please come and give us your presentation. So Ubongiwe, as I said, colleagues, is from the Nelson Mandela University here in South Africa, and she's going to be presenting to us the findings of a study that looked at the possibilities of using multipurpose community centers as catalysts of socioeconomic development. And they conducted the inquiry in one of the rural provinces in the country, which is the Eastern Cape. Over to you, Bongiwe.
Thank you so much, Prof. Indeed, I am, and good afternoon to our academic staff and learned personnel. I greet you all. Prof, I'm still busy with data collection. They are not yet findings and recommendation. Indeed, it's a conceptual paper. The study addresses a growing concern that there are multi-purpose community centers that are not meeting the expected outcome of bringing sustainable development, integration, and improved quality of life to communities where they are located. Are you seeing the presentation? I'm not seeing the secretariat flagging the presentation.
We're not
No,
seeing it.
we're not seeing anything.
Please share it from your side.
I'm handicapped. I'm using a phone. I did send the presentation to the secretariat. Are they able to assist me?
Okay, let's have that conversation quickly with them. Let me have that conversation quickly with them. So let's just take a 2-minute pause. A 2-minute pause whilst I figure out how the secretariat might upload your presentation.
Thank you so much, Prof.
Excellent. We have it, Bongiwe. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Prof. I was just saying the study is critical in the field of construction management, particularly on issues of community involvement and thorough application of consultation processes of relevant stakeholders, as these have proven to be effective ways of building sustainable projects. It is significant that the study will suggest a new approach to roll out Npcc program to communities by government in partnership with all relevant stakeholders. And I must say is that lessons learned from the study will significantly add to the body of knowledge that will help researchers, planners, implementers, facility maintenance, and management of sustainable projects on the best ways to improve Npccs that will respond to socioeconomic challenges, leading to improved quality of household lives and sustainable neighborhoods. You've seen those beautiful structures there. That I've just said that it addresses the concern that yes, we have such beautiful structures that are developed but they are not meeting their expected outcome of meeting sustainable development, community integration, and improved quality of life to communities where they are built. We argue that the poor and the marginalized groups in many communities, they remain deprived access to integrated government services, to information and developmental opportunities in the face of existing Npccs in their areas. So as part of my introduction, I've just said that the creation of multi-purpose community centers is meant to redress the devastations created by both colonial and apartheid rule in South Africa. The NDP 2020 states that apartheid planning, it did place the majority of South African Black people to places far away from work, where services could not be reached and where most people could not participate in their socio and economic development in order to improve their quality of lives. But thanks to the advent of democracy in 1994, that brought hope as far as access to basic services to a lot of people, especially the previously disadvantaged communities where services were limited due to the previous apartheid regime's policies of segregation. So the purpose of the paper, Prof, is to theoretically analyze how Npccs as a built environment outputs can become a strategic stimulus for sustainable development within the already existing and new housing projects, as well as in the informal settlements. So the paper is indeed an outcome of a critical review of literature on the study of Npccs as catalyst for socio-economic development in the municipalities of our Eastern Cape, the poorest of the province in our country. So the study will indeed yield an inclusive and responsive human settlements development model for the creation of a well-functioning and socio-economic impactful multi-purpose centers within the existing and new housing projects, as well as human settlements. Now, how do we define, or how does the code, the housing code, define Npccs? They see it as a social and economic facilities that provide basic amenities to communities which cannot be supplied directly to the individual unit and are then supplied to communities in a collective manner within the community. So the code, the housing code, mentions that these facilities are municipal clinics, they are community halls, they are community parks, they are playgrounds, they are crèches, they are taxi ranks, transportation hubs, sports facilities, and others. These need to be provided in a multi-purpose facilities cluster arrangement, Npccs. So this idea brought about the establishment of Npccs within the already existing housing areas, new housing areas, as well as informal settlements. They aimed at achieving objectives as follows: to facilitate the provision of social facilities, services, to facilitate the development of basic economic infrastructure, to facilitate job creation, to encourage the development of social capital by supporting the active participation of communities in the design, implementation, management, and evaluation of projects. So I must mention the fact that the study uncover factors that hinder the ability of these Npccs from becoming centers that build well-functioning communities. Hence, the study falls under the broader category of implementation, evaluation, research methodologies, which seeks to understand how a program or a policy is working. This helps to avoid the mistake of drawing a conclusion about the effectiveness of the program without knowing whether it has been adequately implemented. So we proceed. That's the definition that Zondi defines Npccs as one-stop centers where local, provincial, and national governments, as well as other service providers, they bring their services in a coordinated way closer to the communities as dictated by the needs of the communities. Most significantly, Zondi made mention of government essential elements as basis for criteria to develop Npccs as follows: that it should be well located in relation to the communities itself, and it should provide appropriate facilities to the providers using it. And then all key service providers should be accommodated within the multi-purpose community center, and it should be cost-effective to maintain and sustainable in the long term. For an example, it must be well maintained and it must be revenue generating for it to be sustainable. Then I'm not going to mention that one. I've got 20 minutes. Coming to multi-purpose community centers and housing projects. HDA, our Housing Development Agency, Monitoring and Evaluation Unit, issued a media statement maintaining that apartheid spatial planning separated and racially divided South Africa. HDA argues that housing projects have been built in poor peripheral locations where there are no amenities and basic services. So they argue that the cost of providing services is higher in sprawling urban environments because services had to be provided over long distances to where most low-income housing has been built. So redressing the apartheid spatial planning patterns is very critical in addressing many challenges facing unequal societies, such as inadequate housing, poor access to basic services, increased levels of unemployment, and many others. So coming to proceed, I'm saying that since the inception of a democratic South Africa in 1994, indeed, there were few social and economic amenities that were developed in both rural and urban human settlements development. Our constitution, that section 3(4), subsection 4 of the Housing Act, enacted in terms of the constitution, it introduced the national program called the Provision of Social and Economic Facilities that was going to investigate this need, the need of basic and socio-economic amenities. So the code does provide the provisioning of certain basic social and economic facilities through the national housing program called the Provision of Social and Economic facilities. So this program deals with the development of primary public, social, and economic facilities within existing housing areas, new housing areas, as well as in the informal settlement upgrading projects. In cases where municipalities and responsible entities were not able to provide such facilities. So this move was necessitated by a backlog in the provision of social and economic facilities in these housing areas. So this was further necessitated by the decision that was taken by the cabinet that we should shift from just providing houses into creating sustainable human settlements. It is at this point that the decision to provide social amenities was then taken. So this program was designed to improve access to social and economic amenities in these housing areas in order to complete the mandate of creating human settlements rather than the provision of houses. So the number of Npccs that have been implemented by the Department of Human Settlements in the country, they have increased in response to this call. So the National Planning Commission does declare that progress has been achieved since the inception of our democratic government in 1994, but regrets that South Africa is indeed far from achieving the reconstruction and development program objectives of improved infrastructure, land reform, decent public transport, development of industries and services that use local resources and meet local needs. So the atrocities that were inflicted by the apartheid regime, they continue to persist in our country. So I'm coming now to infrastructure and sustainable development. An Npcc is a physical amenities and infrastructure. So the role and availability of infrastructure is globally admitted as significant, very significant in achieving socioeconomic growth. So a relationship can be drawn between infrastructure development and improved quality of life. So Khan and Bagger, they argue that without adequate infrastructure, modern commerce characterized by production, specialization, and exchange across market will be affected. So they strongly maintain that the provision of sound infrastructure facility can contribute to the regional productivity growth and to the overall aggregate of the country in general. So they do categorize infrastructure into economic and social infrastructure, and they state that economic infrastructure includes transport, communication, energy, etc., whereas social infrastructure includes the delivery of social services such as health, housing, education, etc. So an Npcc center is a social infrastructure that provides a wide range of services and facilities for the overall well-being of the community. I'm not going to touch on. So the role of Npcc community centers as a social infrastructure is to respond to the local needs and interests of the local population. Secondly, it is to contribute to the health, well-being, and quality of life of the members of the community through a range of services, activities, and programs that support the lifestyle needs, that foster social networks, social cohesion, and social inclusion, and build the skills and capacity of local people. So there is therefore no undeniable connection between infrastructure and development. In fact, academic authors, they confirm that the availability of infrastructure services significantly influences development of regions and countries. So they do argue that the level and quality of infrastructure play an important role to both households and firms, as it may influence investment, migration, business productivity, and growth. Banga agrees that infrastructure is an integral part of growth and development, and he views it as a program for eradicating poverty, reducing income inequality, and enabling employment creation. And according to him, this approach to infrastructure prioritizes the understanding of social, economic, and human development linkages in infrastructure delivery. He does believe that development should consider people and their needs at the center of infrastructure delivery programs. So an Npcc is a physical amenity meant to provide development in a community where it has been erected. And they coordinate programs meant to empower communities to be self-reliant and sustainable. So this says a well-planned, well-implemented, well-managed Npcc, they are sure to become vehicles for sustainable development. Thank you, Prof. I'm still there. So Npcc's community centers are a feature in bringing sustainable development in communities. Many authors attest to that. But Swanepoel and De Beer, they define sustainability as a development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So they do argue that the goal of development should be to eradicate poverty, not to address it or deal with some of its manifestation. They emphasize the fact that development is not supposed to bring about some relief or some improvement to poor people, but instead it should break the shackles of poverty and free citizens from such bondage. I'm going to take us through the barriers to Npcc's community centers sustainability. It must be noted that lack of suitable land is a barrier to sustainability of these multi-purpose centers. So gaps in the land, housing, and development policies is identified as a key challenge to successful implementation of multi-purpose community centers. So the availability of land can unlock such a challenge. I'm not going to go delve deeper. Secondly, it's lack of integrated infrastructure planning. Then the National Strategic Framework for Comprehensive Municipal Infrastructure Management in South Africa allows for the integration of planning, sector coordination, and life cycle sustainability of all infrastructure assets and sustained municipal capability to deliver services. So misalignment in planning between three spheres of government is a barrier to Npcc's community centers sustainability. So the policies, funding, and strategies of the national and provincial sphere should feed into the IDP processes at the local level in order to ensure that cooperative governance is enhanced. So integration of plans and partnership with all relevant stakeholders must be visible in district and local municipalities to ensure sustainability of infrastructure projects. And there's lack of limited community participation and involvement also. What this means is that when we impose a project to the community, this becomes a barrier to its success. So there should be proper consultation and community participation for the sustainability of any project. So there are those authors of guidelines for community participation who define community participation as the involvement of members of the community in projects that affect their lives in order to solve their problems. They do argue that though community members cannot be forced to participate, but they should be given an opportunity to make suggestions and take responsibility where possible. Then inclusive human strategy for Npccs. Like I've mentioned that there are Npccs that are completed as part of the Department of Human Settlement Strategy to create sustainable neighborhood, but to this day are not functional. This necessitates that there should be an inclusive human settlement strategy to relook into the provision of Npccs erected within the existing, the new human settlements project, as well as the informal settlements. So the LGASA provides 5 planning phases for social infrastructure that I will have to consider when coming up with this inclusive human settlement strategy that will help in the planning, implementation, management of these Npccs, not only in the province of the Eastern Cape, but also in the country and internationally, globally. So what they say,
Bongiwe, I'm sorry, dear colleague. I'm going to have to ask you to take 1 more minute to wrap up because unfortunately we are way over time. I realize that you have not been seeing the messages we've been sending you via the chat facility, but it's fine. Please just take a minute, 1 minute to wrap up.
Thank you so much. So those are the phases from that academic guru that I will consider when coming up with this inclusive strategy. But in conclusion, let me say that multi-purpose community centers are indeed a stimulus to sustainable development and do promote community development. And indeed, even though some of them are regarded as white elephants, but the communities are in need of them. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bongiwe. Colleagues, please take the floor, ask any questions, offer remarks and comments for Bongiwe. Hello. Any?
Yes, Dr. Ojo has her hand up.
Oh, wonderful.
Okay.
Oh my gosh, I don't know why I'm not able to see people's hands.
All right. No, thank you.
Can the person
Dr.
who's,
Ojo can go first, and then we have Judith second.
actually, can I also ask you to end the screen sharing, the sharing of Bongiwe's screen, because I think that is what is preventing me from seeing the raised hands, because I don't see them.
Okay, I think Sam is supposed to do that.
Okay, anyway. Luandile, if you can see them, please invite them to offer their comments or questions.
Yes, Dr. Ojo can go first.
Okay, thank you very much for permitting me to make some comments. First of all, I'd like to commend the efforts of the organizers of this symposium, which is bringing together a lot of experts to deliberate on silent issues on human settlements. Concerning the last presenter's views, I only want to make one or two comments. The first one is that there is need to specify the uses that will be comprising the multiple purpose community centers. The reason is that these uses have to be compatible, not conflicting. That will also have a kind of intention to attain sustainability. And another issue is that the public needs to be carried along in any planning venture. The planning is meant for the people, and the people has to be carried along from the inception of the plan so that it can work. No matter how good a plan is, if the people don't like the plan or accept it, it can't fly. So we can't separate people's participation from the process of planning. It's very, very important. Then the multipurpose community centers must have the agenda of sustainability behind it. And sustainability will be achieved in when the three legs are addressed: economic sustainability, social sustainability, and environmental sustainability. It's not just enough to provide houses, the shelves, but it has to be in relation with the social, economic, and the physical environment. And that means overall sustainability. Without that, those plans cannot sustain, and it will even definitely fail. So these are my comments. And apart from that, I want to commend the presenter for a good job. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Olufemi. Bongiwe, please confirm if you're able to get or hear the comments made by Dr. Olufemi.
Yes, Prof. I
Okay.
captured all of them. They are
Okay,
valuable comments that I will really take into consideration as I move forward. Thank you so much.
Okay, great. I'm going to give Judith an opportunity to share her comments and then allow you, if there are any questions from Judith, I will give you 2 minutes to respond to those questions. Thank you. Judith, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you so much, Chair, and thank you, Bongiwe, for the presentation. I was actually really enjoying all that you were putting across to us, and thanks to the other presenters. But particularly on Bongiwe's presentation, I think for me it's a real concern because I had worked and as an architect putting up some of these Npccs. And driving through some of the communities and seeing that they're not functioning as intended, it's really a cause of concern. And also knowing that the cost of these Npccs are quite high. And I was wondering if Bongiwe is going to take into consideration the cost-benefit analysis of this type of social infrastructure in the communities. Also, you raised a good comment about the functionality of the Npccs, and one of the points you've raised is capacity. I'm wondering, and I don't know if you have taken it into consideration, if within the communities that these Npccs are being built, is there a capacity sufficient to, skills capacity, for instance, sufficient to keep the Npccs in a functional manner? So is there the working capacity in terms of the technological skills? Because I know they are really about government information services that the communities may need, technology, libraries, and this kind of advanced technology being brought closer to the communities. So are you going to take that into consideration in your analysis? And if you are, or if you will be, just if you can comment on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Judith. Bongiwe, over to you. There is a question that you've been asked by Judith. Please take a minute to attend to the question, after which myself and Lwandile will then wrap up this session. Thank you, Bongiwe. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Prof. Thank you so much to the commentators as well. Yes, I will take into consideration the issue of doing cost-benefit analysis. But it is a sad fact to mention the fact that the issue of cooperative governance, the intergovernmental relations, the issue of not having a proper IGR between the three spheres of government, that has hampered the functionality of these Npccs, because you discover that, Judith, provincial government, they implement these amenities, these Npccs, they hand them over to municipalities, and you discover that the municipality is not even ready to take over the ownership of these amenities because they've not been prepared to take over. You think of the budget to run this amenity, you think of the staff that is to run this amenity. Indeed, there is just no capacity. Hence, I'm saying these things, I need to relook into them and make sure that the planning, like the first speaker has said, should involve all the stakeholders that are supposed to be there. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bongiwe. Thank you to our 4 presenters for doing a great job of providing really important and compelling studies or presentations on studies that you've done in different cities, in your individual cities, to look at the kinds of solutions that are needed in order for our cities to become inclusive and livable. So I'm just going to take a minute to give my closing remarks, which will really just be a reflection. I'll be giving a reflection on what each of the presentations gave us, or the kinds of thoughts that each of the presentations inspired, and the kinds of conversations that we should be having going forward. I'm then going to give my co-chair, Lwandile, also an opportunity to give his closing remarks, and we'll then be done. Yes, thank you for muting yourself. Yes, colleagues, so we've had a great time, as I've said, and for me, these 4 presentations have really been helping us think about how do we co-produce the kind of city that we want in each of our geographic spheres. How do we co-produce with others the kind of city that we want? One that is a home for all, and where home is not just a physical space that we occupy, but a way of feeling, a way of feeling that enables us to feel included and to experience the city as a place where we belong and that we have a right to. Our first presenter, Samuel, gave us a presentation that looked at the appropriateness and credibility of the Hungarian city development concept, to point us to the kinds of ingredients, if you will, or the kinds of indicators that we need to build cities that are not only sustainable, that are not just sustainable, and that don't just tick all the kinds of boxes that we have, for infrastructural competence, but cities that are also livable and inclusive. And he showed us in his presentation that the study that they've done to check or assess the robustness of this Hungarian concept, the study found that indeed this concept is credible. It's a credible model that can help us evaluate African cities. And he made a very important point that the prominent approach to evaluating cities is to use indicators and measurements that have been constructed elsewhere to measure whether a city meets the needs of all those who live in it. And is saying that in this Hungarian model, their assessment of it that included conducting a surveys with ordinary occupants of the city in Nigeria where the study was done. They made sure that they determined the perspectives of the people residing in that city about what it would take for the city to be livable and inclusive and so on for them. So, and in so doing, is saying the Hungarian model gives us an opportunity to evaluate African cities using African constructs of the kinds of indicators that are needed for us to be able to say a city is sustainable and is livable and is the kind of space that makes a home for everyone. So I found that very important and very compelling, and I think it's the kind of research that we should be translating for our different African governments to say, this is the kind of model that you should be adapting to check how your own government in your particular African city is developing a city that is livable and inclusive for its people. Akande's presentation reported on the capacity of a GIS approach to provide a robust, reliable assessment of the potential for small hydropower systems to generate power for communities that don't presently have it. And his study found that the GIS approach that they tested is indeed sufficiently capacitated to enable cities or governments to identify if a river, such as the river that was the subject of his case study in Nigeria, if a particular river can have a small hydropower system installed in it, and as such be able to generate power for the communities that surround it. And once again, in that conversation, I found that one of the takeaway messages that I hope even Akande as a PhD candidate is going to take forward with him is that this kind of research is telling us there are innovative solutions that we can use to identify opportunities for us to expand access to resources such as water and so on, that would make an urban space livable. And so, but if we are producing and testing these innovative solutions and our governments remain uninformed about them, then really we are not going to engage in what we refer to as research for development. Our research is only going to be important for academic platforms such as this one, but it's not really going to translate to tangible changes in our cities. And so my challenge to Akande and to all of us is that let's take these studies such as the one that Sam presented, the study that Akande presented. They are both pointing to models that our African governments need to be looking to. So let's find a way to translate that knowledge, this evidence that we have about these innovative solutions, and let's translate it in so that they are able to consume this type of knowledge. When Akande said, yes, we do intend to publish in academic journals and to speak at conferences like this as a way of reaching policymakers, I wanted to say, yes, that would be sufficient as a first step, but we know here in South Africa, from here to Nigeria, we know that our governments don't consume that kind of evidence. They don't go to academic journals generally. Maybe the department, the ministries of health in our different countries, maybe they do that. But generally, they don't go to academic journals when they are looking for solutions. We have all kinds of factors that determine what gets on the policy agenda. And if we want research evidence, scientific evidence, to be one of the factors that determine what gets on the policy agenda of our governments, then we need to find other ways of reaching them beyond our academic journals. And so my call is, let's do policy briefs. Let's develop the kind of infrastructure we need for every scientist, emerging and senior and experienced, to know how do I take my research findings and translate them to the kind of knowledge, to the kind of format that will be consumable by policymakers, decision makers, non-profit sector players, development agencies, etc., who do not come to these kinds of spaces when exploring policy options. So let's go from here, Akande. Think about the development of policy briefs. Think about the kinds of meetings that you need to set up in that particular region in Nigeria where you conducted your research, even if they take time to make use of the evidence that we present to them, as long as we keep at it and we keep bombarding them and keep insisting to have audience with them so that we appraise them of these innovative solutions that we're developing and testing, eventually it's going to become a culture in our governments to turn to us for solutions. Otherwise, for me, it would really be a wasted opportunity if we didn't do that. Then we had colleagues, a presentation by Prof. Coleman Jordan, which, as I said, I found very compelling and very critical for the kinds of conversations that we should be having, particularly as African scholars. I become so sad when I find us coming together to talk about issues of development and social justice, issues of inequality, such as spatial inequality, the kinds of conversations we're having. And we limit our conversations to topics and framings that are relevant for people who don't have the kinds of oppressions that we face. I find it very sad. The kinds of conversations that we should be having are such as the one that Prof was presenting now, Prof Jordan, who challenge us to reflect on the psychological experience of the African in our cities. He focused mainly on Europe, but he touched on America. And as an African who is living in this country, I knew that what he reported about how African migrants experience Europe and how African Americans experience cities in America definitely applies and resonates with how Africans in this country experience this country of Africans. And it is a psychological experience that is alienating, that makes us perpetual foreigners in any city that we occupy. And of course, Professor Jordan was pointing out that Africans who are immigrants in the cities experience these psychological effects of alienation, of exclusion, much more than the ordinary African. But generally, the experience is for all of us, because the cities of the world, including the ones that are in Africa, were not created with the African in mind as one who would occupy and thrive and flourish and enjoy the city. The cities of the world, from here in KwaZulu-Natal, where I'm sitting in Durban, to New York, were created with only the understanding that Africans would be passerbys. They would be passing through to coming to work or for whatever purpose, but not as citizens. And it continues to be the case even in this country. Our spaces alienate us. We have to mute and limit who we are as Africans in these cities in Africa. Here in this neighborhood where I'm located, which is a white neighborhood, I have to mute certain aspects of my blackness in order to be able to belong, in inverted commas, because it's not real belonging. But in order to, they use these terminologies, integration, assimilation. What really is that? What does it look like for the African to integrate? Because often it isn't that you are bringing in who you are and you are taking on a secondary culture. It is often that you are muting and destroying who you are to live as in the image of another. So for you to be accepted and welcome there. There are ways of being African that we cannot realize in these spaces. And for me, what I find so compelling and so important and so troubling as an African scholar in the presentation given by Professor Jordan is that, my goodness, so we have this global experience, this common experience as Africans of being not completely, or at least not full citizens in the cities that we occupy. And we have another layer, we have another population of Africans who experience that to the 10th degree, much worse. And these are African migrants. In this country, if you are a European migrant, you will experience the beauty and the sense, your sense of belonging in this city where I'm located now will be much greater than the sense of belonging experienced by an African who is, you know, originally born here. But it will be especially alienating to the African who is from outside. And it becomes particularly painful to find we're not having these conversations as African scholars. We have a problem of xenophobia in this country, in South Africa. What Prof. Jordan is talking about, the kind of mental health burden that African migrants in Europe experience, African migrants in this African country experience too. And much of that mental, poor mental health, they experience not only because of the generic structural hardwiring of the city to make Black people feel alienated, Black people in general, but part of that experience of mental health, poor mental health, is because of their treatment by other Africans. And we don't use our academic spaces to engage in such conversations. So I found the presentation incredible, and I find it necessary, and I find it urgent. We should be talking about, you know, when we moved on to a presentation that was given by Ubongiwe Kobe, a great presentation on how multi-purpose centers can be used as catalysts of economic development. I thought, Bongiwe, this is something I need you to take forward in your research, because you said you are at the conceptualization and development stages. I need you, when you are developing and conceptualizing this study, to look at how multi-purpose centers in peripheral and marginalized communities in the Eastern Cape province, in South Africa. When you look at how can we make these multi-purpose centers conducive to facilitate socioeconomic development, I want you to ask first the question to yourself: what do we assume about these peri-urban spaces that were, because multi-purpose centers are only developed in peri-urban and rural spaces, spaces that the apartheid government marginalized and placed on the periphery so that Africans would have their labor used, would be sort of known to be around, but would not be seen, nor experienced by white people living in the city in this country. So those spaces were created to put Africans away, so that we are not a society for sore eyes, for white people's eyes. Now, my question is, if we are going to look and explore how multi-purpose centers can be made effective mechanisms to realize economic development in these townships, in these peripheral places, in these informal places, what do we assume about what is possible in those places? Why do we, I find it interesting for me that we will engage in all kinds of efforts to realize sustainable development in places that should not be. These peri-urban spaces were not created to allow Africans to thrive. They were created for the opposite. Legislatively so, socially so. The apartheid government used 325 pieces of legislation to make sure that Africans would not thrive. So these spaces post-apartheid have not changed. They are still, you still have Ikailicha. They are still peripheral. They are still thrown away where they are. They are still hostile environments that perpetually produce violence, hardship, great difficulty for the African. And they are hardwired to do only that. So why do we then develop such interventions like multi-purpose centers, place them in these places that have no hope of becoming places where Africans can thrive because they are not engineered to be so? Why do we assume, why do we assume that these multipurpose centers are not only just going to create access to social development and so on, are not going to make it easy to reach the post, to access the post office? Why do we extend the hypothesis further to say, oh, they could also become mechanisms to realize economic development? I don't know if you are hearing me, Bongi. I'm not at all criticizing that you're asking the question. I think it's an important research question that you have, but I want you to be far more critical when you undertake as you go further, to be fun and start the conversation with pointing out that these peri-urban settings are not meant to result in economic development for Africans. They are built and set up, in fact, to, in all ways that matter, to decimate the African and leave us in a state of perpetual trauma. That's what their purpose is for. And it hasn't changed post-government, post-apartheid, because even when we build the low-income housing for people who cannot afford them, we still build them in those communities. We have not created a single policy in this country that allows Black people locked up in those ghettos to be able to own a house in the city, in the comfortable, safe space here. Very few Black people, as you know, those who are from this country, very few Black people can afford. I'm sitting here as a professor in such a neighborhood, and it has cost my family everything to be able to own a home here. And it remains a precarious ownership because it takes one income shock and we won't be able to live here because of the high interest rates that we're paying in terms of bond, the high residential rates that we're paying, that you cannot afford if you're not someone who has set up to economically thrive. So even the so-called middle class cannot get their way into the city, not without miracles and not without continuous stress, chronic stress, as we try to hold on to this home that you've bought in the city, which, by the way, continues to alienate you, as I said in the beginning of my talk, which is not a home for you. If you ask me where I'm from, I'm not likely to say I'm from this city. I'm likely to point to my rural home where my parents came from. I will say, if you meet me on the road and say, where are you from? As you will meet any other African in this country, you ask them where they're from. They're not likely to give their location in the city, even if they've stayed there for 20 years. They're likely to talk about their rural home because these cities are not a home for us. So what I'm saying is, we haven't created policies and no one is requiring those policies. Not a single policy has been created to facilitate and make it easy and make it possible for Black people to leave those ghettos that were not created in their interest and be able to occupy. Instead, what we're doing in those ghettos is to create multipurpose centers. And then we say, through this multipurpose center, we're going to end your experience of oppression in this oppressive place. How so? So I want you to take that on. We take this on in terms of all other kinds of neoliberal initiatives that have been touted as the solutions to help poor Black people who are chronically trapped in man-made poverty. And we say, oh, create self-help initiatives, get them together to save, even if R1 a day, and in time they'll be able to buy their own homes. We have self-help initiatives that are now taking up here in the city of eThekwini, here in Durban. They told me that they interviewed someone that they appointed, an official whose entire job is to mobilize informal communities, people who are living in shacks, to mobilize them to come up with solutions for themselves, to get them some of those shacks and be able to live in a decent house, in a decent community. How so? How is that going to happen? What are we assuming about Africans? What are we assuming about what apartheid did and what this kind of apartheid infrastructure that persists, what it is doing to Africans, that we should think we can create such solutions and they will, boom, create the magic that is needed for our people to live as humans, as fully human in this country. Colleagues, I've spoken so much, but I think that whenever I get the opportunity, I always find it's important to engage in this because we are not having those kinds of conversations and we need to be having them. We need to be pushing ourselves further to demand more for the African in these cities, demand more. We need to demand more, we need to expect more from here, as I said, to New York. There is more to be demanded rather than trying to make do with what we have. And I'm not saying these solutions should not be used. I'm not saying multiple purpose centers should not be developed. I'm saying we should not overstate what they are able to achieve for a people who are locked in an inhumane environment that was not designed to result in prosperity and just normal thriving. On that note, I will allow, thank you for bearing with me, because at some point I looked and I checked and I expected that maybe I'll find that there are only three people left in the room because we've gone over time. But I will allow my co-chair to give his closing remarks, and then I will thank you, colleagues. I'm sure that there may be people who would want to respond and share their own views. And I wish this kind of conference was in an in-person conference, because then during break or tea, we would be able to extend and continue these conversations, which I find so important. Over to you, Lwantil.
Thank you so much, Prof. Yanga. Again, thank you everyone for allowing me for being part of such an informative session from such prestigious academics. It has indeed been an honor to listen to everyone's work and shared thoughts and opinions of the different presentations, looking from the proposed model presented by Sam and the opportunities of the renewable energy and hydropower from Akande, and then also the social issues which were highlighted by Prof. Coleman, which I think are very sentimental in terms of the immigrants and refugees, but also looking at Bungiwe's presentation on the multipurpose community centers, which I also would like to agree that they may be a catalyst of socioeconomic developments to mitigate the discrepancies of the apartheid regime and our ambiguous democratic government interventions. But also, I would like to believe that we also have to translate the academic findings into real-life implementation initiatives in order to transform and actually change people's lives. Because over and above that, I also agree with the complexities within our government, which is probably the biggest barriers in all our development agendas as academics. But we have a major responsibility within our hands to ensure that these initiatives are always realized to improve living conditions of all our African people. But just as your sentiments, just to share your sentiments, Prof. Yanga, on such challenges, I take this also on a very personal level, whereby it's time we make a stand as Africans and show our Africanicity, culture, and togetherness to prove our traditional statements of Ubuntu, so that we tackle all forms of spatial displacement, alienation, segregation, and post-democratic apartheid, because I believe it still exists. But with that said, I will not talk a lot more. I would just like to look forward to all the presentations and discussions that will come in the following days. And thank you again so much for the opportunity and everyone for being involved.
Thank you,
That's
colleagues.
it from me, Prof. Thank you.
Thank you, colleagues. This was a great session. I hope we'll have an opportunity to interact and engage on other platforms, in other conferences, in other meetings. Otherwise, I wish you all well. I almost said for those of you who will be traveling, I forget it's not an in-person conference. But I wish you well. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of the conference. I'm going to close this room now.
Thanks, Prof.
Thank you all.